Welcome, traveler of time. Here, on this channel, we bring the ancient world back to life through gentle storytelling, detailed history, and journeys across civilizations that shaped humanity. If you enjoy calming stories of the past and want to keep exploring with us night after night, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us continue to wander through history together. So, find a quiet place, let your mind rest, and allow the voices of history to guide you. Tonight, we open another chapter from the ancient world. And today, our journey takes us to Greece, the land of myths, philosophers, warriors, and storytellers whose ideas still live within us. Long before the names Athens and Sparta echoed across the Mediterranean, before philosophers carved thoughts into memory, there was simply the land. Greece is a land shaped by contradictions. Mountains rise suddenly, their jagged peaks splitting valleys into small, self-contained worlds. The tallest, Mount Olympus, seems less like stone and more like a throne set against the heavens. Valleys are narrow, soil often thin, yet where it clings to the earth, olive trees grow with stubborn grace, their roots twisting deep for survival. The sea embraces it all. Unlike Egypt's Nile or Mesopotamia's great rivers, Greece has no single waterway uniting its people. Instead, it has countless bays, coves, and harbors. From nearly any hilltop, a Greek could walk a short distance and see the blue Aegean stretching beyond imagination. The sea was their bridge, their promise. It invited them outward, to islands sprinkled across the horizon, to Anatolia in the east, to Egypt in the south, to Italy beyond the west. To live in Greece was to live both isolated, in a mountain valley, and connected by the restless water that beckoned every generation. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The sound of cicadas in the heat of noon, goats wandering over rocky slopes, fishermen mending nets by the shore as gulls circle above. The smell of thyme and sea salt fills the air. This is the cradle in which Greek history was rocked gently into being. Before there were written records, before rulers had their names etched into stone, the Greeks explained their world through story. Myth was not entertainment. It was knowledge, memory, and map. The mountains became the homes of gods. Olympus, highest of them all, housed Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, a divine family whose quarrels mirrored the storms of human life. The sea, unpredictable and sometimes cruel, was ruled by Poseidon, whose trident shook the waters into calm or fury. But myths also explained the ordinary. A farmer scattering seeds remembered Demeter, goddess of grain, whose grief could withhold the harvest and whose joy made the earth bloom. A blacksmith pounding bronze thought of Hephaestus, limping yet tireless at his forge. A traveler lighting a small lamp to guide his way whispered to Hermes, the fleet messenger, patron of paths. The Greeks peopled the landscape with meaning. A spring in a forest might be sacred to nymphs. A cave might be the doorway to Hades' realm. A thunderclap in the distance was no accident, but a sign of divine debate. And within these myths were truths that would shape the culture forever. That gods were near, that human life was fragile, and that stories preserved not only lessons but identity. Around 2000 BCE, long before the classical age of Pericles and Plato, the island of Crete became home to a people who thrived on the sea, the Minoans. Their cities were unlike anything mainland Greece had seen. At Knossos, sprawling palaces rose not as fortresses of war, but as labyrinths of art, storage, and ritual. Walls were painted with frescoes. Dolphins leaping in blue waters, lithe youths vaulting over bulls in acts of daring grace, women in flowing dresses presiding over ceremonies beneath the gaze of sacred symbols. The Minoans seemed to live not for conquest, but for trade and beauty. Their ships glided across the Aegean, carrying olive oil, wine, and pottery to distant shores. From Egypt and the Near East, they brought back ivory, gold, and new ideas. But what captures the imagination most is their mystery. Unlike later Greeks, the Minoans left behind no grand stories of kings and battles. Their scripts, linear A, remain undeciphered, whispers from the past locked in clay tablets. And so we remember them through what they built, what they painted, and what echoes survived. The myth of King Minos, the Minotaur, and the Labyrinth, a tale that may have grown from memories of their vast palaces, so complex that one might lose their way inside. By 1450 BCE, disaster came. Whether by earthquake, volcanic eruption from nearby Thera, or invasion from mainland Mycenaeans, the Minoan world faltered. Palaces fell silent. Frescoes faded under dust. Yet their influence lingered, a seed planted in the soil of Greek memory. On the Greek mainland, another people were rising, the Mycenaeans. Where the Minoans had built labyrinthine palaces open to trade, the Mycenaeans built citadels of stone, walled with blocks so massive that later Greeks believed only giants, the Cyclopes, could have lifted them. At Mycenae, at Tiryns, at Pylos, kings ruled from high strongholds. They controlled lands, armies, and wealth. Their tombs, beehive-shaped tholoi dug into hillsides, housed treasures, golden masks, jewelry, weapons, grave goods for lords who sought glory in both life and death. Unlike the Minoans, the Mycenaeans left behind records in Linear B, an early form of Greek. These tablets speak not of myth, but of administration. Rations for workers, offerings to gods, tallies of livestock. Yet, through Homer, centuries later, their memory lived as heroes of war. For it was the Mycenaeans who sailed to Troy. Whether Troy was a real war, a series of conflicts, or a tale enlarged with time, its heart beats with Mycenaean blood. Agamemnon, king of men; Achilles, swift-footed; Odysseus, cunning; Hector, noble defender of Troy. These names survived the collapse of their world, echoing down to every Greek who ever listened to Homer's verses. By 1100 BCE, the Mycenaean world collapsed. Palaces burned, populations fell, writing vanished. Greece entered centuries of obscurity, a dark age where much was forgotten, but not everything. Stories, sung by bards, carried memory like embers through the dark. Imagine Greece in the centuries after Mycenae's fall. Villages small and scattered, trade minimal, writing gone. Yet at night, by firelight, singers told stories. They sang of Troy, of Achilles, whose rage could shape the fates of armies, of Odysseus, who wandered among monsters and goddesses, of Helen, whose beauty launched ships across the Aegean. These stories, woven into long epics, were not written but remembered, passed from mouth to from ear to heart, generation to generation. By the 8th century BCE, these songs found their form in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Whether Homer was a single poet or a tradition, his epics became scripture for Greek identity. Children learned lines by heart. Heroes became models of courage, cunning, and honor, but also warnings of pride, wrath, and folly. In this way, the age of heroes lived on, even when the real citadels lay in ruins. The Greeks, stepping into a new age, carried these tales as a compass pointing backward and forward at once. When the long shadows of the Dark Age began to lift around the 8th century BCE, Greece was not one nation, but a patchwork quilt of valleys, islands, and shores. Out of this patchwork grew one of the most important ideas in all of human history, the polis, the city-state. A polis was not simply a city. It was a community, a body of citizens, a place where identity was shared and defended. Some were small, little more than fortified villages clinging to the slopes of hills. Others, like Athens or Sparta, would grow into powers that shaped centuries. But at its heart, the polis was a gathering of people who saw themselves as part of something larger than family, yet smaller than empire. The polis had two natural centers. One was the Acropolis, the high place, often crowned by temples, shrines, and later by monuments of dazzling marble. The other was the Agora, the marketplace, where citizens exchanged not only goods but ideas. In the Agora you might hear merchants bartering, poets reciting, philosophers questioning, and magistrates announcing decrees. It was noise and order all at once, the heartbeat of communal life. The rise of the polis reshaped Greek identity. No longer were people simply from a valley or a clan. Now they were Athenians, Spartans, Corinthians, Thebans. Loyalty deepened, pride sharpened, and rivalries sparked. The Archaic Age was also a time of restless movement. Greek ships pushed outward, seeking new lands across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Population pressures at home, hunger for land, and the lure of trade drove thousands to set sail. From the coast of Asia Minor to the shores of southern Italy, from the islands of Sicily to the far reaches of Spain and Gaul, Greeks planted colonies. Each was independent, yet tied to the mother polis by culture, language, and religion. These colonies became bridges, trading posts of olive oil, wine, and pottery, receivers of grain, metals, and luxury goods from abroad. Imagine standing on the deck of a small Greek ship, its sail taut with wind, the horizon opening ahead. The sea glitters, unpredictable yet inviting. On shorelines far away, locals watch the strangers arrive, some with welcome, some with wariness. Out of such encounters grew new cities like Syracuse, Massalia, modern Marseille, and Byzantium, outposts that would echo Greek life for centuries. This expansion spread Hellenic culture far beyond the Aegean, giving Greece the wider stage it needed to flourish. It also exposed the Greeks to the wealth and wisdom of older civilizations, Phoenicians, Egyptians, Persians, whose influences they absorbed and transformed. One of the greatest inheritances of this age was the rebirth of writing. The Greeks borrowed the alphabet from the Phoenicians, adapting its symbols to fit their language. For the first time since the fall of Mycenaean palaces, words could be captured on clay and papyrus. With this tool, oral epics like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey found permanent form. Poets such as Hesiod wrote of gods and farmers, of justice and work, of the struggles of everyday men. Hesiod's works and days is not about kings and heroes, but about plowing, sowing, enduring, and hoping, a window into the lives of ordinary Greeks. Lyric poets, too, flourished. Sappho of Lesbos wrote verses of love and longing, tender lines that survived fragments and time. Archilochus wrote sharp, biting poetry, unafraid to mock. These voices, sung with the accompaniment of the lyre, gave Greece an intimacy that balanced the grandeur of epic tales. Alongside poetry rose a new way of fighting. In earlier times, war had been the realm of heroic champions, duels between lords whose names filled stories. But in the archaic age, war became the work of citizens. The hoplite was its symbol, a heavily armed infantryman carrying shield, spear, and armor. Hoplites fought in a phalanx, a tight formation of overlapping shields and bristling spears. Each man depended on the one beside him. Alone, a hoplite was vulnerable. Together, they were nearly unbreakable. This was more than military change. It was social change. When farmers and craftsmen took their place in the phalanx, they gained not only responsibility, but a voice. The rise of the hoplite contributed to demands for political rights, for fairness, for systems beyond the rule of kings and aristocrats. The polis was learning that power could be shared, sometimes uneasily, sometimes violently, but shared nonetheless. In the southern Peloponnesus lay the polis of Sparta, one of the most unique societies in Greek history. Surrounded by fertile land but pressed by rivals, Sparta transformed itself into a military state unlike any other. Spartans conquered their neighbors, the Messenians, reducing them to helots, serfs who farmed the land. To keep control over this enslaved majority, Spartans built a society of discipline, training, and constant readiness. Boys were taken from their families at the age of 7 and entered the agoge, the state's education system. They learned to endure hardship, to fight as a unit, to place the polis above self. Food was plain, beds were hard, punishments harsh. Yet bonds between comrades deepened into something unbreakable. Spartan women, unlike in many other Greek states, held unusual freedom. They managed estates, owned property, and were expected to be strong, healthy, and outspoken, for they would be the mothers of warriors. Sparta's government was a blend. 2 kings shared power, balanced by a council of elders and an assembly of citizens. Rigid, cautious, and suspicious of change, Sparta became feared for its soldiers, hoplites who trained not for glory but for collective survival. If Sparta represented discipline, Athens came to represent dynamism. In the rocky region of Attica, the Athenians wrestled with inequality. Rich aristocrats dominated early government, while poorer farmers fell into debt and even slavery. Tensions simmered dangerously. Enter reformers. Solon, in the early 6th century BCE, canceled debts, freed debt slaves, and reorganized society by wealth rather than birth. His reforms did not end conflict, but they opened doors. Later, Cleisthenes introduced reforms that broke the grip of aristocratic clans. He reorganized citizens into new tribes and created the Council of 500, laying the foundation for democracy. In Athens, the assembly of citizens gained real power. They debated, voted, and held officials accountable. It was not democracy as we know it today. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded, but it was a radical experiment in giving ordinary men a voice in their own government. Athens became restless, curious, inventive. Its navy grew strong. Its culture drew poets, artisans, and thinkers. Where Sparta was closed and cautious, Athens was open and daring. By the end of the Archaic Age, Greece had become a chorus of voices, dozens of polis, each proud, each ambitious, each wary of rivals. Yet together, they shared language, gods, and festivals. The greatest of these was the Olympic Games, first held in 776 BCE at Olympia. Every 4 years, athletes gathered to run, wrestle, and compete, not for prizes of gold, but for olive wreaths and immortal fame. Wars paused, truces were called, and Greeks remembered, however briefly, that they belonged to one larger family. But beyond Greece, new powers stirred. To the east, the Persian Empire was expanding rapidly, swallowing lands and people in its march westward. Soon, Greek cities in Asia Minor would feel the weight of Persian rule, and soon after, all of Greece would be called to stand, together or fall divided. The stage was set for a clash that would define the very meaning of freedom in the ancient world. By the dawn of the 5th century BCE, the Persian Empire stretched like a vast tapestry from the valleys of Mesopotamia to the mountains of Anatolia, from Egypt's deserts to the edges of India. The great kings of Persia commanded armies counted in the hundreds of thousands, and their power seemed irresistible. To the Persians, the Greek world was a fringe, a scattering of independent polis on rocky coasts, disunited, quarrelsome, insignificant beside the great empires of the East. Yet it was precisely this independence, this stubborn insistence on self-rule, that would ignite one of history's most memorable struggles. The spark came not in Athens or Sparta, but across the Aegean and Ionia, the Greek cities of Asia Minor. These cities, prosperous and cultured, had fallen under Persian control. Resentful of foreign governors, they rose in rebellion around 499 BCE. Athens and Eretria sent ships to aid them. In a daring strike, the rebels marched inland and burned Sardis, one of the Persian capitals. Though the revolt was eventually crushed, the insult was not forgotten. Darius I, the Persian king, heard of Athens' involvement and vowed revenge. According to tradition, he ordered a servant to whisper in his ear each day, "Master, remember the Athenians." In 490 BCE, Darius sent a great expedition west. Persian ships crossed the Aegean and landed at Marathon, a plain north of Athens. The Athenians, joined by a small force from Plataea, stood in their path. Outnumbered perhaps 2-1, the Athenians faced the full might of the empire. Yet under the general Miltiades, they planned a bold assault. As dawn broke, the Greek hoplites advanced at a run, a shocking tactic against archers who expected them to hesitate. Shields overlapped, spears bristled, and the Persians, unprepared for such ferocity, broke. Thousands were cut down, the rest fled to their ships. Athens had won. A city-state of farmers and citizens had defeated the greatest empire of its age. Legend tells of Phidippides, the runner who raced from Marathon to Athens, a distance of about 26 miles, to cry, "We are victorious," before collapsing. His run inspired the modern marathon race, though the story is as much symbol as fact. But Persia was not finished. Darius died, but his son Xerxes prepared an invasion on a scale never before seen. Bridges of boats spanned the Hellespont. Canals were cut through peninsulas. Armies from every corner of the empire gathered. Herodotus, the great historian, claimed they numbered in the millions, though modern estimates placed them far lower, still vast enough to terrify. The Greeks knew what was coming. For once, they set aside rivalries. A fragile alliance formed, led by Sparta on land and Athens at sea. Across the Polis, messengers carried urgent pleas: resist together or perish alone. The first great stand came at Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a narrow pass between mountain and sea. Here King Leonidas of Sparta led a small force, including his famous 300 Spartans, supported by thousands of allies. For days they held the pass. The phalanx was unbreakable, and the Persians, despite their numbers, could not break through. Herodotus tells of Xerxes watching from a golden throne, astonished at the stubborn courage of free men. But betrayal came. A local Greek revealed a mountain path that outflanked the defenders. Leonidas, realizing the end, dismissed most of his allies. With his 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and a few hundred others, he fought to the death. Though defeated, their sacrifice became legend. Thermopylae was not just a battle. It was a symbol that freedom could be defended even in hopeless odds. As Leonidas fell, Athens faced destruction. Xerxes' armies swept south, and the Athenians abandoned their city, which the Persians soon burned. But Athens had a weapon left: its navy. At Salamis, Themistocles, the Athenian admiral, lured the vast Persian fleet into narrow straits. There, the Greeks' smaller, more maneuverable triremes rammed and sank their opponents. The sea became chaos. Splintered oars overturned ships, men clinging to wreckage. By the day's end, the Persian fleet was shattered. Xerxes, watching from shore, feared his bridges across the Hellespont might be cut. He withdrew with much of his army, leaving a smaller force behind. The final act came the next year at Plataea. A united Greek army, larger now, faced the remaining Persians. After days of maneuvering, the Greeks struck decisively. The Persian general Mardonius was killed, and his forces routed. On the same day, according to tradition, the Greek fleet,